The courtroom thrums with an energy that no one dares to name out loud. It's as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Every seat in the gallery is filled, shoulder to shoulder, strangers craning their necks to get a better look at the two opposing forces standing in the middle of the storm. At the center of it all is Camille Lewis, a sharp-eyed black woman, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, her navy blue suit immaculate, her demeanor calm. But underneath that calmness lies a fire. A relentless hunger for justice radiates from her every step as she approaches the plaintiff's table. Everyone in this room knows her reputation, the fearless lawyer who doesn't lose. And yet, even for her, this case is different. This is personal. Across the room, sitting stiffly at the defendant's table, is Officer Dean Hargrove. He embodies a paradox, a man proud to wear a badge meant to symbolize protection, yet steeped in the murk of scandal and whispered accusations. His square jaw is set, his lips curved into a faint sneer as he regards Camille, his disdain barely concealed. His uniform is pristine, but it cannot mask the air of entitlement that clings to him like smoke. His reputation precedes him in another way. This isn't the first time his name has appeared in court tied to accusations of racial bias, but it may very well be the first time it holds consequences. The judge enters, and the room shuffles to its feet. Judge Eleanor Grayson is a towering figure, not in stature but in presence. Her hawk-like gaze sweeps the room, a silent command for order as she settles into her chair. You can tell she has no patience for theatrics, no interest in anything but the truth. Today, her impartiality will be put to the ultimate test. Camille takes the floor first. Her opening statement is riveting, weaving facts and raw emotion into a narrative that grips the jury and silences even the casual murmurs of the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she begins, her voice steady and strong, "what we have before us isn't just a case about one man's actions. It's about the systems that allow those actions to go unchecked. It's about justice, and it's about accountability." But just as her argument gains momentum, a sharp voice interrupts from the defendant's table. "Objection! This has nothing to do with the facts of the case." Officer Hargrove's lawyer, a gray-haired man with an air of practiced confidence, rises, his tone dripping with irritation. Judge Grayson merely raises an eyebrow before gesturing for Camille to continue. "I'll allow it," she says firmly. Camille doesn't miss a beat, her commanding presence filling the courtroom once more. The day proceeds with witness testimonies and cross-examinations. Most are routine, a procedural march through facts and timelines, but the tension never dissipates. It hangs like a storm cloud, growing darker with every passing hour, fueled by the occasional side-eye from Hargrove to Camille, or whispered comments traded between the defense team. And then comes the breakpoint. Late in the afternoon, Hargrove is called to the stand. The gallery suddenly feels impossibly small. Every creak of the wooden benches, every shuffle of shoes against the floor seems amplified. Camille approaches him as though she's a lioness stalking prey, her movements deliberate, her questions razor-sharp. "Officer Hargrove," she says, her tone measured but unmistakably pointed, "can you explain why you felt it necessary to detain Mr. Wallace during a routine traffic stop?" Hargrove's jaw tightens. He was acting suspicious, he says, his voice edged with defensiveness. "Suspicious how?" Camille presses, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that dares him to lie. "He kept looking in his rearview mirror," Hargrove replies after a pause, his tone suggesting he finds this explanation perfectly reasonable. The gallery murmurs, a ripple of disbelief passing through the room. Camille allows it, using the moment to drive her point home. Looking in his rearview mirror, she repeats slowly, "During a traffic stop, which you initiated. Are you telling this court that such behavior justified forcibly removing him from his vehicle and placing him under arrest?" Hargrove shifts uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, the cracks in his facade begin to show. "He was resistant," he mutters, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "Resistant," Camille echoes, her voice rising slightly for effect. "By staying inside his vehicle and asking why he was being pulled over? Does that qualify as resistance, Officer Hargrove? Or perhaps does it qualify as fear? As confusion? Ouch. Or even, dare I say, anger at being stopped for no discernible reason?" Her words seem to echo in the silent courtroom. Even Judge Grayson leans slightly forward in her chair as though anticipating a revelation. Hargrove's attorney quickly rises. "Your Honor, objection." She's leading the witness and grandstanding. "Sustained," the judge says after a pause, though her tone carries no reprimand. Camille nods, retreating slightly, but not before she plants a final seed. No further questions, Your Honor. The tension remains high as the day winds down. Just as the court prepares to adjourn, Hargrove breaks his own silence. He mutters something under his breath as he steps down from the stand, a comment not meant to be heard but audible enough to stir the room. You people always play the victim, don't you? The words land like a punch, and for a moment the courtroom erupts into chaos. Gasps, whispers, even a few indignant shouts ring out before Judge Grayson bangs her gavel for order. Hargrove, realizing his mistake, tries to mask his slip with an arrogant shrug, but the damage is done. His attorney buries his face in his hands. Camille, ever composed, doesn't react, but her silence is louder than any retort. She gathers her papers, her movements deliberate, and delivers a single piercing glance at Hargrove before walking back to her seat. The court adjourns for the day, but the tension doesn't dissipate. It follows everyone out of the room like a shadow. The murmurs of the gallery turn to open speculation. What will happen tomorrow? Can Camille turn this moment of blatant prejudice into a decisive victory? There are no clear answers, but one thing is certain. The battle has only just begun. As the cameras flash outside the courthouse and reporters clamor for statements, Camille walks to her car in silence. Her phone buzzes with messages, but she ignores them, her focus unshaken. Tonight, she will prepare. Tomorrow, she will fight. And somewhere in the distance, Officer Hargrove sits alone, the flicker of unease beginning to gnaw at the edges of his confidence. Recap. Camille's relentless questioning corners Hargrove into revealing his prejudiced mindset, culminating in a shocking overheard comment that ignites the courtroom and sets the stage for an even more explosive confrontation tomorrow. The first rays of daylight spill into the courthouse, illuminating the oak-paneled walls and long corridors that feel more like a battlefield than a place of justice today. The energy from yesterday's courtroom exchange lingers, so thick it feels almost tangible. Even before the proceedings resume, the lineup of spectators waiting to claim their seat outside is twice as long as the day prior. Reporters jostle with their cameras, eagerly speculating about today's events and replaying yesterday's damning climax for the viewers at home. Inside, Camille Lewis sits at the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed but inwardly bracing herself for the next round. She scrolls through her meticulously organized notes, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook, a calculated preparation for the whirlwind awaiting. The quiet determination in her eyes hasn't dimmed since she walked into the courtroom on the first day. If anything, it burns brighter now, fueled by the sheer audacity of Officer Hargrove's slip-up, a comment that went from thoughtless muttering to the focal point of a national discussion overnight. She knows better than anyone that turning that moment into a win will be no easy task. Across the room, Hargrove appears markedly less confident than the day before. Though still in his crisp police uniform, his demeanor betrays cracks in the armor. His attorney exchanges hushed words with him, occasionally casting wary glances across the aisle. The attorney's voice is low but firm, every gesture suggesting a man trying to rein in a client who stubbornly refuses to believe he's in real trouble. Hargrove's dismissive expression hasn't changed, but the faint dark circles under his eyes tell a different story. The room grows still as Judge Grayson enters. Her black robes billow slightly as she takes her place, her gaze as piercing as ever. There's a subtle nod, and the clerk announces the official start of today's proceedings. Conversations halt, attention sharpens, and the storm resumes. The first witness is called to the stand, a retired police captain who had served alongside Hargrove years ago. Camille's expression is unreadable as the seasoned man settles into the chair. The captain's testimony begins calmly, recounting logistical details about department policies and procedures until Camille begins her cross-examination. "Captain Andrews," she says, her measured steps taking her closer to the witness stand, "during your time supervising Officer Hargrove, did you ever encounter any incidents suggesting a pattern of racially biased behavior?" A heavy pause fills the courtroom. The captain shifts uncomfortably in his seat, glancing toward the defense table as if silently asking for permission to answer. When none comes, he clears his throat. "The department faced community complaints during that time, yes," he says carefully, choosing every word as if it's a landmine. "Complaints," Camille repeats, her tone neither accusatory nor soft, but perfectly balanced. "And were these complaints investigated thoroughly?" "They were logged," he replies, clearly trying to remain neutral but failing to mask the reluctance in his tone. Logged and buried, Camille presses, her voice rising just enough to capture every juror's attention. Isn't it true, Captain Andrews, that many complaints regarding Officer Hargrove's conduct were dismissed as unsubstantiated, despite witness reports and corroborating evidence? Objection. Hargrove's attorney cuts in, his tone exasperated. Speculative and irrelevant. Judge Grayson leans slightly forward. Overruled for now. Please answer the question. The captain hesitates, his discomfort growing visible. There were challenges with the vetting process. It's not uncommon in any department. Challenges, Camille repeats, her frustration veiled but palpable to those paying close attention. She strides to her desk, retrieves a document, and approaches the bench with deliberate steps. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit C into evidence, a series of internal records detailing community complaints against the officer in question, spanning the past 6 years. Judge Grayson reviews the papers quickly before nodding. Admitted. Camille steps back, her heels clicking confidently against the floor. Captain Andrews, one last question. If these complaints had been thoroughly investigated, do you believe harm to individuals like Mr. Wallace could have been avoided? The defense lawyer jumps in again. Your Honor, objection. Hypothetical questions serve no purpose here. Sustained, the judge agrees, her gavel tapping lightly against the wood. Camille doesn't react outwardly, but pivots swiftly, steering her line of questioning in a new direction. No further questions. For now, she says, her voice tinged with a sharp professionalism. The captain, visibly relieved, steps down, but the ground he's left behind feels fractured. Another tremor in the fault line beneath Hargrove's defense. As the morning progresses, witness after witness takes the stand, each one spotlighting a piece of the tapestry that paints Hargrove as more than just an isolated figure capable of a mistake. A traffic analyst demonstrates inconsistencies in Hargrove's reports, while a community advocate speaks to the rising tensions his policing methods caused. Every voice adds weight to Camille's case, brick by damning brick. It's not all triumph for the prosecution. The defense pushes back hard, at times turning the spotlight on Mr. Wallace himself. Hargrove's attorney paints the plaintiff as an agitator, someone quick to provoke conflict. Though Camille counters adeptly, there's no mistaking that the fight today is uphill. The defense is well versed in the art of shifting blame, and the jury takes it all in with unwavering seriousness. Then comes the moment everyone has been waiting for. Camille calls Officer Hargrove back to the stand. A murmur ripples through the courtroom like a low tide, curiosity almost audible. Hargrove takes the stand, shoulders squared and jaw clenched. He tries to exude confidence, but it reads more like defiance. Camille begins her questioning with calculated precision. Officer Hargrove, let's revisit your decision to arrest Mr. Wallace, starting from the moment you initiated the traffic stop. On what grounds did you justify that level of escalation? Hargrove's response is defensive. As I said yesterday, he was acting suspicious. It's standard procedure to assess potential threats. And yet, Camille interjects coolly, your dashcam footage contradicts parts of your written report. For example, the claim that Mr. Wallace was aggressively resistant. We see no signs of aggression from him, no raised voice, no non-compliance. Explain that discrepancy. Hargrove bristles, shifting slightly in his seat. I don't control how things look on video. Cameras don't capture everything. The jury remains expressionless, but the tension in the room thickens. Camille presses closer. Let's move on then. Yesterday, as you left the stand, you made a comment that, to many in this room, came across as deeply prejudiced. You people always play the victim, did you not? The defense objects immediately, but the damage is done. The gallery stirs with subdued outrage, and Judge Grayson restores order with a sharp bang of her gavel. Sustained. The jury will disregard the question, but the seed is planted. The jury may not officially take note, but no one can truly unhear what was said yesterday, or how Hargrove reacts now, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the stand. Camille waits patiently before moving on, carefully treading the line between propriety and assertion. Officer Hargrove, can you definitively state that Mr. Wallace's race played no role whatsoever in your decision-making that morning? The room feels like it's holding its collective breath. It didn't, Hargrove says curtly, but there's a flicker of hesitation that doesn't go unnoticed. Camille leans in slightly, her voice lowering just enough to intensify the moment. And yet, dozens of similar complaints across multiple years suggest otherwise. How do you reconcile that, sir? His lawyer interrupts before an answer can form, launching into an impassioned objection that distracts just long enough for the moment to dissipate. Judge Grayson rules in his favor and Camille steps back, strategizing her closing strike for later in the day. The hours roll painfully by, legal point countering legal point, testimony deflating and inflating the stakes as the courtroom alternates between moments of high drama and procedural drudgery. But as the clock inches toward the late afternoon, Camille makes her final tactical move of the day. Your Honor, she begins, I'd like to submit my final witness for today's session, a forensic linguist who has reviewed Officer Hargrove's communications over the past 2 years. This time, Hargrove visibly flinches. His attorney objects fervently, claiming the witness is irrelevant, but Judge Grayson allows it. The linguist takes the stand, a poised academic whose smooth demeanor underscores the gravity of her words. Over the next 10 minutes, she explains patterns found in internal emails, field notes, and incident reports, all tracing subtle but undeniable indications of prejudice in Hargrove's language. Phrases like, those people, they always, and looks like trouble recur in documents under his name. The jury listens raptly, some leaning forward, disbelief mingling with quiet outrage across their faces. By the time court adjourns for the day, the stage is set for tomorrow's crescendo. Camille, packing her files with fluent precision, catches sight of Hargrove exiting the courtroom. For the first time, his expression isn't one of arrogant assurance, but of unease, a man wrestling with the dawning realization that his fortress of excuses may not hold much longer. Outside, the press gathers once more, a swarm of cameras sweeping over every player in today's drama. Camille says nothing as she descends the courthouse steps, her focus unbroken. And yet, as she reaches her car, her phone buzzes. A single text appears on the screen, unsigned. Be careful, he's desperate now. Recap. The day sees mounting evidence of Hargrove's pattern of prejudice, culminating in a chilling reminder that the stakes are higher than ever, and stopping him won't come without unforeseen risks. The courthouse crackles with a sense of expectancy as the crowd files back into their seats for another critical day in the trial of Camille Lewis versus Officer Dean Hargrove. The gallery is filled to capacity, every space taken by spectators who refuse to miss a single detail of the unfolding drama. The air hangs heavy with a collective uncertainty, a palpable swirl of tension and anticipation that feels almost alive, pressing against the room's ornate walls. Today, everyone knows, is a make-or-break moment. Camille Lewis sits at her desk, unshaken yet focused. Her eyes scan her own handwritten notes with a hawk-like sharpness. The navy blue of her suit seems darker under today's lighting, lending her an aura of immovable resolve. From time to time, she taps the edge of her pen against the desk, an idle rhythm that's almost hypnotic to those watching her closely. She looks like a soldier preparing for battle, bearing an unshakable belief in her cause, but also the weariness of someone who has faced countless wars of the same kind. At the other table sits Officer Dean Hargrove, still in his uniform, though some buttons on his jacket appear hastily adjusted, a tiny detail that betrays his rising unease. He's surrounded by his legal team, each whispering hurried strategies, all the while casting watchful glances toward the plaintiff's side. Hargrove stares straight ahead, his face locked in a mixture of defiance and agitation. But his eyes, the one place his lawyer cannot train him, betray something else entirely: exhaustion. The clock strikes sharply as the courtroom door opens and Judge Eleanor Grayson strides in. Silence falls over the chamber immediately. Unlike the procedural start of most court days, today even the smallest shuffle ceases, as if everyone present knows that any misstep will miss the tension's rhythm. The judge's voice pierces the air like a gavel hitting steel. "We will resume where we left off," Judge Grayson commands, her tone razor-sharp. Her gaze lingers on both litigants briefly before she continues, "Counselor Lewis, if you're ready, you may call your next witness." Camille prepares to rise, but before her knees straighten, the sound of a disruption ribbons through the gallery. Someone, one row back, begins whispering aggressively, leaning toward another spectator, their words too unclear to decipher, but loud enough to jar the mood into a momentary state of disorder. A bailiff moves quickly, issuing a warning glare. It's a brief interruption, but an unwelcome one enough to remind the courtroom of how the world outside ravages against it, hungry for answers. Camille steps forward. Her demeanor, now perfected into laser-focused professionalism, doesn't waver. The plaintiff calls Dr. Michelle Harper to the stand. A woman in her mid-40s approaches the stand. Dr. Harper is sleek and commanding. Her flowing green blouse and neatly tied hair give her a calm, authoritative aura. She is introduced as a clinical psychologist who specializes in trauma response, specifically for minority groups confronting discriminatory systems. Her credentials are unquestionable, her expertise daunting. Camille wastes no time. Dr. Harper, Camille begins with a calm, measured voice. You previously evaluated my client, Mr. Wallace. Can you tell this court about his psychological state shortly after the incident? Dr. Harper adjusts her glasses, her gaze sweeping the room as if ensuring every person, from juror to distant spectator, knows the weight of her answer. Mr. Wallace presented symptoms consistent with acute stress disorder, which manifested after his encounter with Officer Hargrove, she states. And how would you characterize these symptoms? Camille presses, folding her arms neatly, her tone gentle but insistent. Heightened anxiety, a feeling of pervasive distrust, difficulty sleeping, classic markers of someone who has experienced a deeply unsettling violation of their sense of safety and identity. Dr. Harper pauses, her lip tightening slightly. What stood out most was his undercurrent of guilt, of helplessness, as though he was grappling with the idea that no level of civility or compliance could have protected him. The room hangs onto her words. There are no murmurs this time, no disruptions, just the weight of the professional disclosure ringing in the minds of each juror. Camille leans slightly closer to the jury. And would you agree, she continues carefully now, that incidents like these often trigger a compounded fear, not only within the victim but within entire communities? Yes, absolutely, Dr. Harper replies immediately. Discriminatory acts in positions of authority reverberate. They create a sense of collective fear, mistrust, and often perpetuate cycles of systemic inequality. Thank you, Dr. Harper. Camille takes a single step back, giving the defense no hint at her satisfaction, then states, "No further questions for this witness." The defense lawyer rises swiftly, already combative. His well-practiced, calculated moves begin chipping away at Dr. Harper's testimony, portraying her as a detached academic tackling issues too complex to boil down to one isolated case. But Camille barely reacts. She knows every objection is just smoke, buying the defense time before another blow lands. When the cross-examination concludes, the rhythm of the courtroom changes. Both sides brace for Phase 2 of the Dea documentary piece of evidence that could upend the narrative altogether. Your Honor, Camille begins, stepping forward again, the plaintiff is prepared to submit audiovisual Exhibit D into evidence. The defense immediately rises. Objection. Highly inflammatory and prejudicial to my client. Judge Grayson tilts her head toward Camille. Explain your rationale, Counselor Lewis. The footage, taken from Officer Hargrove's dashcam, is directly relevant to determining the validity of his claims regarding Mr. Wallace's alleged resistance, Camille responds, her voice devoid of theatrics but brimming with surgical intent. The video will show not only Mr. Wallace's calm demeanor but also Officer Hargrove acting with disproportionate force. The judge deliberates only briefly before ruling, overruled. The jury may view the video. A screen descends from the courtroom ceiling and the lights dim. The courtroom collectively braces for what's coming. The video begins. The crisp quality of the dashcam footage casts every detail in sharp relief. The sound, though slightly muffled, is enough to hear the reasoned tone of Mr. Wallace during the first few moments of the encounter. The courtroom watches in rapt silence. Mr. Wallace, seated in his car, speaks clearly and calmly, asking Officer Hargrove to articulate an explanation for pulling him over. Hargrove's demeanor, at first measured, grows defensive within moments. The escalation is swift, jarring. Before long, he's yanking the door open, pulling Mr. Wallace out, the man's hands raised slightly in stunned compliance. The climax occurs when Hargrove's voice thunders, "Stop resisting!" even as the video makes it painfully clear that there is no visible resistance. The silence afterward is haunting. It's broken not by murmurs or movement, but by the low ambient rumble of tension clawing at the room's surface. Everyone, not only the jury, has seen the truth laid bare. The defense tries to salvage credibility, pointing out technical inconsistencies and angles, all while steering hard away from the emotional anchor the footage has planted deep in everyone's mind. Camille remains still, recording notes, her outward calm betraying nothing. She knows the real consequences of that video haven't fully settled yet. They'll ripple outward, eroding every other defense Hargrove tries to erect. As lunchtime approaches, the courtroom breaks for recess. Camille returns to her bench without fanfare, merely collecting her preparation materials with mechanical precision. But just as she rises to leave, she notices a baleful stare from Hargrove, a brief, seething flash of disdain that speaks volumes. She doesn't acknowledge it overtly but files it away. She knows what desperation looks like, and Hargrove is showing cracks that even his legal team can't effectively patch. When the session resumes, Camille shifts gears. Her final tactical move comes in the form of a character witness and old colleague of Hargrove's. Officer Brian Templeton, a retired patrolman with reluctant eyes, is clearly uneasy as he takes the stand. Camille approaches him methodically. "Officer Templeton," she begins, "can you recall any instances during the years you worked with Officer Hargrove that gave you pause moments when his actions were out of alignment with the principles you were sworn to uphold?" Templeton hesitates. His demeanor reads as someone torn between loyalty and conscience. He stammers. "Dean's a passionate officer. Sometimes that passion could be misinterpreted." "Misinterpreted?" Camille echoes, her tone neutral but firm, letting the word hang in judgmental silence before drilling further. "Can you cite a specific example?" His hesitation thickens the air. "There was a traffic stop where, I can't say for certain, but it seemed he escalated things faster than was probably necessary." The defense objects loudly. "Your Honor, speculative. There's no direct connection to the case at hand." "Sustained," Judge Grayson replies, but the seed, once again, has been planted. Camille doesn't relent entirely, though, directing her questions more steeply toward policy adherence versus personal specifics. She coaxes a subtle admission from Templeton by the close. Officers are certainly expected to use de-escalation tactics, and lapses in protocol form serious failures in policing culture. By the end of the day, Camille provides one last arrow to her quiver. Submitting supplementary documents into evidence, she delivers pages upon pages sourced from disciplinary records involving Hargrove that trails far beyond mere coincidence. The jury, though weary, remains anchored to her logic, unable to ignore the breadth and consistency of her proof. The session concludes with commotion yet again brewing in the spectator area. As the gavel signals adjournment, footsteps rush in a hurried but clumsy fashion as someone from the gallery's outskirts tries to maneuver toward Camille's desk. "Ms. Lewis," a voice calls, loud but pitched toward whispers. A man emerges, clearly a civilian, desperate to make her attention. He doesn't appear directly threatening, which prevents bailiffs from reacting immediately, but urgency shapes his every word. "I have something important," he claims. Camille halts halfway to the exit. The courtroom suspends even seconds past adjournment because some climax, unknown, lingers unevenly. Recap: dashcam footage reshapes the trial's stakes irreversibly, while a tense exchange with an unexpected newcomer leaves the courtroom buzzing with fresh intrigue. The courtroom transforms under the morning light, casting an almost sacred glow upon the dark oak panels. The battles fought here feel both ancient and immediate, each new case reverberating with the echoes of past injustices, triumphs, and compromises. As the clock ticks toward the appointed hour, the energy in the room is taut, brimming with expectations that border on palpable. Spectators file into their seats in hushed urgency, while members of both legal teams arrange files and evidence with an air of intensity that suggests they've worked long past midnight. Camille Lewis stands at the plaintiff's table, again the picture of composure. But this morning, there's something even sharper in her posture, an unmistakable resolve etched into her every gesture. Her eyes sweep the room swiftly, cataloging every detail, every movement, every micro-expression from the defense team. Her focus sharpens when her gaze lingers on Officer Dean Hargrove, whose stiff and distant demeanor betrays what can only be described as simmering hostility. His perfectly pressed uniform gleams in sharp contrast to the shadows of tension and weariness that cling to his features. As if choreographed, the doors to the courtroom open just as Judge Eleanor Grayson strides in, her silhouette backlit against the light flooding in behind her. The room stands as one, and Judge Grayson takes her place with the same commanding presence she's shown throughout the trial. The gavel strikes without ceremony. "Court is now in session," her voice intones, and the air itself seems to hold its breath. "Counselor Lewis, the floor is yours," she announces. Camille rises, her movements fluid yet deliberate, walking toward the center of the room with purpose. "Your Honor," Camille begins, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. What we have uncovered over the past few days is a growing, irrefutable pattern. Today, the plaintiff seeks to shed even more light on what transpired during the encounter in question, and how that incident ties into a greater context of systemic misuse of authority. The defense table stirs uncomfortably, and the defendant's lead attorney quickly adjusts his papers in irritation, but Camille doesn't so much as glance in their direction. Her poise is aimed at the jury, her words wielded like scalpel edges. I would like to submit into evidence Exhibit E body camera footage that further elaborates on Officer Hargrove's conduct during and after the incident. The defense lawyer immediately stands, his voice taut with disapproval. Objection. My client has repeatedly stated that the footage in question, taken post-incident, involves actions that are not relevant to the specific charges at hand. This is an attempt to inflame the jury, nothing more. Judge Grayson lifts a hand and silence falls. Counselor, I'll remind you that your evidence must clearly pertain to the matter at hand, she instructs Camille, though without dissuasion. Camille nods in acknowledgement, steeling herself before proceeding. Your Honor, this footage provides critical context, not only regarding Officer Hargrove's actions but his mindset. This bias and his deliberate choice to escalate an otherwise routine encounter into something far darker. It is entirely relevant. After a pause heavy with deliberation, Judge Grayson signals to the technical operator. Very well. Proceed. The courtroom lights dim and all eyes fix on the screen as the footage begins to play. Unlike the dashcam recording from yesterday, this video is rawer, Shakira body camera's perspective moving through chaotic, overlapping sounds of police chatter and city noise. The lens captures fragmented visuals. Officer Hargrove gesturing sharply as he exits his vehicle and approaches Mr. Wallace, who is standing on the curb beside his car. The footage chronicles a surreal unraveling. Mr. Wallace maintains a calm, albeit bewildered stance, his hands visible. Why are you doing this? His voice echoes in the recording, a question of equal parts frustration and fear. Hargrove, however, appears agitated, his voice clipped and accusatory even as Mr. Wallace repeatedly complies with instructions. But it's the closing moments of the footage that leave an indelible mark. After Mr. Wallace has been subdued, forcibly handcuffed despite no resistance, Hargrove mutters something into his body cam. Michael most a private remark to himself. The audio captures it, unmistakable. Can't win with these people. The courtroom is plunged into a stunned silence. Gasps punctuate the air like sharp intakes of breath. The unmistakable weight of those 5 words lingers, seeping into every corner of the room, impossible to escape or ignore. The defense erupts with objections, their lead attorney near shouting about bias and irrelevance, but the damage has already seared itself into the minds of everyone present. Camille does not react visibly to the outburst, her control is absolute. Rather, as the lights come up and the screen retracts, she steps forward to address the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, she begins, her words slicing through the renewed murmurings in the gallery. This trial is not merely about one man's prejudiced actions, abhorrent though they are. It is about a system that allows such prejudice to fester unchecked, to thrive in darkness. What you witnessed, what you heard, was not an isolated slip of anger or frustration. It was the quiet reveal of a mindset that has survived not despite this system, but because of it. Her tone sharpens, her gaze sweeping across the jury with piercing precision. We have before us a question. Do we let fear and hatred masquerade as authority? Or do we stand together today to say enough? The defense attempts a hasty counter-presentation of their narrative, calling Officer Hargrove's precinct superior to the stand. The attempt revolves around portraying Hargrove as a dedicated officer under strain. Yet, Camille's cross-examination dismantles the testimony systematically. Captain Finnegan, Camille probes, pacing slowly but confidently, you referenced Officer Hargrove's career dedication several times. Have there been instances where this so-called dedication resulted in internal complaints? Finnegan hesitates, glancing nervously toward the defense table. His voice is forced as he replies, there were procedural inquiries, as is standard in any department. Procedural inquiries, Camille repeats dryly, halting her pace for emphasis. You're aware that in Exhibit C, which was submitted yesterday, there are over 30 complaints filed against this officer, including excessive force and racially charged remarks? The captain shifts uncomfortably but maintains silence. Camille drives the point further, her voice growing colder. Do those 30 complaints strike you as standard, or do they suggest something far more systemic? The captain's non-answers and evasive body language speak volumes more than his testimony. By the time the lunch recess arrives, the courtroom buzzes with a fever-pitch energy. Reporters outside clamor for statements, though both Camille and the defense maintain stoic silence as they exit, each for their own refuge. Afternoon proceedings see a shift in tone as the defense, on visibly shaky footing, swings wildly to redirect attention. They zero in on Mr. Wallace's pasta-strained, desperate recounting of minor infractions, none remotely proximate to the gravitas of the present case. Camille counters each remark deftly, her calm unraveling of their narrative a masterclass in precision lawyering. It's only as the day nears its twilight that a critical twist arrives. Camille calls her last witness for this round of testimony. She introduces a local investigative journalist who spent years collecting data on law enforcement misconduct. "Mr. Hawthorne," she begins, addressing the neatly dressed man who takes the stand, "in your research, you've compiled records involving Officer Hargrove's interactions with the community. Can you detail what trends, if any, have emerged?" The journalist nods, his voice confident but measured. "There's a clear, troubling pattern. Higher frequency of stops involving people of color, a disproportionate rate of escalations in those stops, and significantly more reported complaints tied to his assignments compared to his peers." As the defense fires objections and attempts to cast doubt on the journalist's credibility, the room senses the struggle. Their arguments are unconvincing, their refutations unfocused. Camille's line of questioning delivers a slew of unshakable statistics, mounting data that paints an increasingly damning picture. The tension crescendos with the arrival of closing arguments, not Camille's, but an unexpected interruption that comes moments before adjournment. In the gallery, the same man who approached Camille the day prior rises again, his face pale but determined. "I have information critical to this case," he declares loudly, his voice carrying over the din of whispered speculation erupting around him. The bailiffs move swiftly, surrounding the man, but not before his final words pierce through the commotion. "I was there. I saw everything that happened." And with that, the courtroom plunges once more into chaos, the electricity of unfinished revelations crackling in every corner. Recap. The trial is rocked by the unexpected submission of damning footage and a last-minute eyewitness revelation, leaving the outcome hanging in precarious balance. The courtroom is a silent abyss as the next day of proceedings begins. The atmosphere, initially charged but cohesive, now feels fractured, each person an atom spinning in anxious uncertainty. Rumors swirled overnight about the unauthorized outburst, a man claiming to have witnessed everything, a man who seemingly emerged from nowhere. Camille Lewis stands at the plaintiff's table, serene yet tightly wound like a violin string tuned to the brink. There's a sheen of resolve in her eyes that hints at her readiness to push forward, regardless of surprises or disruptions. The battle isn't nearing the end yet, but the waves are cresting, and she knows precisely how high they must rise. The gallery is busier than ever. Rows of strangers sit shoulder to shoulder, whispering nervously before the gavel slams and the proceedings officially begin. Somewhere among them sits the mysterious figure from the day prior, though now encircled by bailiffs with cautious expressions. His face is as pale as it was yesterday, but there's a quiet confidence in his posture that draws wary attention. Who is he, and why has he waited until now to come forward? That question seems to run in the minds of everyone present, from reporters stationed at the back to the jury members shifting uneasily in their seats. Judge Eleanor Grayson appears from her chambers, bringing with her the same commanding energy she's displayed throughout this high-stakes trial. "Order," she says curtly, her voice razor-sharp. The gallery hushes, waiting for what they know will be another unforgettable day. Before we proceed, Grayson announces, her tone impartial and piercing, "I must address yesterday's disruption involving an uninvited claim of eyewitness testimony. After extended deliberation, this court has decided to allow the individual in question to present his account as long as it directly pertains to the incident at hand. Counselors, prepare yourselves accordingly." The ripple of murmurs that follows is brief and quickly quelled. Camille allows herself the faintest flicker of reaction, a quick perceptible narrowing of her eyes aimed at the defense table. Officer Hargrove shifts uncomfortably under the weight of Judge Grayson's no-nonsense stare. His facade of confidence seems increasingly strained, a fortress that slightly crumbles with every passing hour. The man, whose name is revealed as Marcus Veers, is eventually escorted to the witness stand. His entrance is unceremonious but magnetic nonetheless. Marcus is unremarkable at first glance, dressed modestly and carrying a tired air about him, yet there's something substantial in his gaze as he faces Camille, not defiance, not submission, but a kind of earnest transparency. Camille approaches him slowly, her composure as impeccable as ever. "Mr. Veers," she begins, her voice calm and precise, "you requested to testify regarding what you claim to have witnessed on the day in question. Can you confirm your proximity to the incident involving Mr. Wallace and Officer Hargrove?" "I can," Marcus replies firmly. His voice carries a surprising steadiness that cuts through the suffocating quiet. "I was parked less than 50 feet from the stop. I saw everything." The courtroom holds its collective breath. Marcus's every word feels like a stone dropping into still water, creating ripples felt across the room. Camille allows the moment to stretch before continuing, keenly aware of the weight his testimony might hold. "And why," she inquires carefully, "did you wait to come forward until now?" Marcus's expression tightens briefly, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Fear," he admits, his voice breaking slightly before steadying again. "I knew Hargrove by reputation. Coming forward felt dangerous. But after watching the trial, knowing what was at stake, I couldn't stay silent." This confession ignites the gallery with faint gasps, stifled whispers. Judge Grayson gives a sharp glance toward the spectators, and order is restored. Camille nods at Marcus, her posture softening just enough to convey appreciation, though her tone remains razor-focused. "Thank you for your honesty," she says. "Now in your own words, please describe what you witnessed that day." Marcus takes a deep breath. "I saw Mr. Wallace's car get pulled over. At first it seemed routine. Hargrove walked to the car, talked to him through the window, but things escalated fast. Hargrove got angrier, louder, even though Wallace wasn't doing anything threatening. He just sat there, trying to explain." Marcus pauses as if the memory itself weighs on him. Then Hargrove yanked open the door and dragged him out. There was no resistance, none. It was like he wanted to make it look like a fight, but Wallace wasn't fighting. The details reverberate throughout the room, each sentence punctuated by the silent intensity of the jury's stares. Camille nods again, her voice lowering slightly. "And did you hear anything specific during this exchange? Any comments made by Officer Hargrove?" Marcus's eyes flicker visibly, his lips pressing into a tense line. "Yeah," he answers gravely. "While he was cuffing Wallace, Hargrove muttered something like, 'You people are all the same.' He said it like he didn't care who heard." Another wave of murmurs surges through the gallery, and this time even Judge Grayson struggles to hold their immediate reactions in check. Camille doesn't so much as blink, though the sharp inhale she takes is barely noticeable. Just to clarify, she counters firmly, ensuring every juror hears the gravity of her words. "You are certain of what you heard?" "Absolutely," Marcus responds without hesitation, clear as day. The defense springs to life, visibly rattled but wildly determined to discredit the witness. Hargrove's attorney grills Marcus on every conceivable detail, his vantage point, his reasoning for not intervening, even his relationships within the community. The barrages are relentless, but Marcus withstands, each reply calm, unwavering. Even under the weight of aggressive questioning, he remains unyielding, his words a steady foundation for Camille's case. Once Marcus steps down, Camille seizes the momentum to call her next witness, Jenna Tate, a forensic audio analyst who spent hours dissecting the recorded mutterings captured on Hargrove's body cam from the recently admitted footage. "Ms. Tate," Camille starts, "based on your analysis, did you uncover significant information from the disputed audio recordings?" Jenna adjusts her seat, addressing the court with professional ease. "Yes. We amplified and isolated background audio from the moments following Mr. Wallace's arrest. The recording clearly includes the phrase in question, 'You people are all the same.' There's no ambiguity." This statement lands like a thunderclap. For the second time in an hour, the courtroom teeters on the brink of chaos, the raw weight of unveiled prejudice sucking air from the room. The defense objects forcefully, but Camille has anticipated every counterattack. With calm efficiency, she submits the findings as additional evidence, more bricks in the growing wall Hargrove can no longer climb. By now, Hargrove himself looks less like a stoic officer and more like a cornered animal. His discomfort radiates, sweat beading on his previously composed visage. Camille spares him a brief glance enough to communicate that she's not only winning the fight, but dismantling him piece by piece. As the afternoon stretches on, Camille delivers a strategic coup de grace, a presentation of statistical reports tied exclusively to Hargrove's career. Each bar graph represents excessive force complaints disproportionately aimed at minorities, each pie chart his inflated stop and arrest rates targeting specific communities. By the time she concludes, the jury's expressions have shifted from intrigue to grave resolve. The story of systemic abuse is becoming not only plausible, but chilling. The day nears its end, and tension peaks in immutable crescendo. Judge Grayson's gavel signals a temporary recess, and every person in the room exhales as though they've been holding their breath for hours. The gallery files out noisily, reporters rushing to relay the day's explosive revelations to the outside world. On the courthouse steps, where the sun dips low over a thrumming city, Camille pauses momentarily. A few reporters shout questions, but she ignores them, her gaze lifting briefly toward the skyline. Her phone buzzes as a simple text message from an unknown number. "Careful, Camille," it reads. "Some storms strike back." She stares at it for a moment, her expression unreadable, before slipping it back into her pocket and walking toward the courthouse doors, ready to finish what she started. Recap. Marcus Veers, an unexpected eyewitness, testifies to Hargrove's blatant escalation and racial prejudice, while expert forensic analysis confirms damning remarks caught on tape, edging the trial closer to a tipping point of reckoning. The next morning brings a strange quiet to the courthouse, the kind that feels more like the inhale before an explosion. Camille Lewis, dressed in an even darker shade of navy, walks with a briskness that reverberates down the polished hallways. Every step is intentional, every glance calculated. She knows today's session could tip the scales entirely. It's either the moment the jury sees the truth unmistakably or the moment the defense finds a way to cloud it. The gallery isn't just full now, it's overflowing. People cram into every available crevice, leaning against walls and whispering softly among themselves as they await the day's fireworks. Outside, the media has doubled in size, cameras capturing the growing public interest in a trial that feels less about a singular incident and more about a nation's reckoning. Judge Grayson enters promptly at the top of the hour, her presence as commanding as ever. But there's a subtle shift in her expression today, a deeper furrow in her brow. Even she can feel the weight of what's to come, though her impartial exterior betrays none of it. The jurors file in shortly after, their faces serious, eyes slightly muted with exhaustion but still focused. Their burden, too, is palpable. "Ms. Lewis," the judge says, her voice crisp and sharp, "you may resume your case." Camille thanks the judge with a small nod, her composure unshaken as she strides to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," she begins, turning to face the jury, "before we proceed, the plaintiff would like to submit one final piece of evidence into the record. A sealed deposition taken just this morning." The defense immediately springs to action, their head attorney standing so fast his chair wobbles behind him. "Objection! Your Honor, this trial cannot accommodate last-minute theatrics. My client is entitled to adequate preparation against any evidence presented." Judge Grayson turns her piercing gaze to Camille. "Counselor Lewis, explain yourself." Camille's face remains calm, her tone as measured as ever. "Your Honor, this deposition comes from a key witness who only recently felt safe enough to come forward, following Mr. Veers' testimony yesterday. The witness corroborates numerous details already submitted into evidence, and I believe this court agrees that uncovering the truth is worth the additional consideration." The defense attorney scoffs audibly but doesn't interrupt. The judge leans back slightly in her chair, her eyes narrowing in contemplation. Everyone in the room leans forward imperceptibly, waiting for her decision. Finally, Grayson speaks. "The deposition will be admitted, but you'll need to walk a fine line, Ms. Lewis. No further surprises." "Understood, Your Honor," Camille replies smoothly. Her confidence during these crucial moments strikes like a silent storm, no dramatics, just an unshakable belief in the case she's piecing together. As if the courtroom wasn't tense enough, the next sequence of events crystallizes the stakes. Camille plays a recording of the deposition, the voice of the new witness cutting through the silence. It's a middle-aged woman, her tone filled with quiet conviction but tinged with an edge of fear. "I live across the street from where it happened," the recorded voice begins. "I saw Officer Hargrove pull Mr. Wallace out of the car, shove him down by the hood, and start yelling. He wasn't yelling to stop resisting or anything like that, no. He was yelling things like, 'Don't act like you're better than the law, your kind always does.'" The gallery murmurs, the whispers swelling to an almost audible hum before Judge Grayson raises a cautious hand. Once order is restored, Camille faces the jury again, her calm exterior intact, but her words cutting like knives. "Members of the jury," she begins, her gaze sweeping from face to face. "You've heard multiple accounts, viewed footage corroborated by audio, and now you've heard testimony from a second eyewitness. This isn't mere coincidence. It's a pattern. And it's a pattern Officer Hargrove can no longer deny." The defense's cross-examination of the recorded deposition is swift but superficial, unable to shake the foundation Camille has laid. Each objection, every desperate deflection, only serves to underline the fragility of their case. After the recording ends, Camille calls her next witness, a whistleblower from within the police department. The room visibly tightens with tension. This is the moment many had speculated about since the outset of the trial. The witness, a young officer named Paul Marks, enters the courtroom and takes the stand. His uniform is crisp, but the lines on his face tell a story of internal conflict. He looks uncomfortable, even slightly frightened, but something about Camille's unyielding confidence as she approaches him seems to steady his nerves. "Officer Marks," Camille begins, her voice softer now, disarming. "Thank you for your courage in testifying today. I understand this hasn't been an easy decision for you." Marks nods slightly, his fingers gripping the edges of the witness stand. "No, ma'am, it hasn't." "And yet," Camille continues, "you chose to come forward, despite the personal and professional risks. Can you tell this court why?" Marks swallows hard, then answers, "Because it's the right thing to do. What happened to Mr. Wallace? It wasn't just wrong. It's part of a bigger problem. One that some of us in the department have been talking about for a long time, but we're too scared to do anything about it." A ripple of unease passes through the room. Camille steps closer to the stand, her expression softening just enough to encourage Marks without diminishing the gravity of what he's saying. "Thank you for your honesty," she says. "Now, Officer Marks, in your time at the department, did you ever witness or hear about Officer Hargrove engaging in behavior that was unprofessional, discriminatory, or abusive?" Marks hesitates, his eyes darting briefly toward Hargrove, who sits at the defense table with a face like stone. "Yes, ma'am," Marks finally says. "There were complaints, a lot of them, but they were always swept under the rug." "Swept under the rug," Camille echoes, her voice rising slightly for emphasis. "Who was responsible for ensuring those complaints were properly investigated?" Marks looks visibly uncomfortable now, but he answers nonetheless. "It usually went to his supervisors. I don't know exactly what happened after that, but nothing ever seemed to come of it." "And in your opinion, Officer Marks," Camille presses, "did this lack of accountability contribute to what happened on the day Officer Hargrove stopped Mr. Wallace?" The defense raises an objection, citing speculation, and Judge Grayson sustains it. But the point has already been made. The audience, the jury, and most importantly, Officer Hargrove himself have all heard it. By the time the day wears on into late afternoon, Camille stands for her closing argument. She opts not to dwell on the mountain of evidence already presented, choosing instead to appeal directly to the humanity of the jury. "Every case like this," she begins, her voice quieter now but no less powerful, "isn't just about one person's suffering, it's about what kind of society we want to live in. Do we want a world where authority is wielded with integrity and accountability, or do we want to turn a blind eye to what we've seen, to what we've heard, to what we know in our hearts to be true?" Her words hang in the air, heavy and unrelenting. She takes one last step toward the jury, her gaze locking onto theirs, one pair of eyes at a time. Mr. Wallace didn't ask for this. He didn't want to become a symbol or a headline. He just wanted to feel safe in his own car, in his own skin. That's all anyone wants. And today, you have the power to begin making that possible, not just for him, but for every person who's ever wondered if justice was truly meant for them too. As Camille returns to her seat, the gallery is deathly silent, as though everyone collectively holds their breath. Even the defense, who delivers their closing argument with fervor and desperation, can't reclaim the impact of her words. The session adjourns shortly thereafter, the trial now officially in the hands of the jury. But as Camille exits the courtroom, the storm she's fought so hard to weather shows no signs of subsiding. Outside, reporters shout over one another, shoving microphones and cameras in her face. Still, she says nothing, her focus unbroken as she disappears into the awaiting car. It's only once she's alone that she allows herself a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzes again, another text from the same unknown number. They'll do whatever it takes to win. Watch your back. Recap. Camille delivers shattering testimony from a whistleblower and a late eyewitness, painting an unassailable narrative of systemic abuse as the jury begins deliberations under the shadow of mounting threats. The jury deliberation had entered its second hour, and the courtroom was cloaked in a suffocating silence, broken only by the faint shuffles of papers from the prosecution and the defense. Camille Lewis sat at the plaintiff's table as still as a statue, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Every fiber of her being was trained on maintaining her composure, but the tension in the room was palpable, tightening with each passing second. Across the room, Officer Dean Hargrove shifted in his seat, his face set in a grim scowl. Every so often, his defiant gaze drifted toward Camille, but his usual bravado seemed muted. His lawyer leaned closer to him, whispering what were likely last-ditch reassurances, but Hargrove's jaw remained clenched. The man who had spent months dismissing the seriousness of this trial now looked like he was perched on the edge of destruction. When the jury finally filed back into the courtroom, the room tensed as one. Camille rose to her feet as the judge re-entered, her hands steady but her pulse pounding in her ears. What followed next could determine the arc of justice itself, not just in this courtroom, but in the broader, gaping wound of accountability for authority figures like Hargrove. Judge Eleanor Grayson's voice rang out crisply in the tense silence. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stepped forward, a nondescript middle-aged woman whose expression gave nothing away. She unfolded a piece of paper and cleared her throat. "Yes, Your Honor." The anticipation was unbearable. Camille felt her breath catch low in her throat as Grayson gestured for the verdict to be read. In that brief pause before the words spilled out, everything seemed to slow. The weight of the trial, the echoes of testimonies, the overwhelming expectation in the air. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Dean Hargrove." The door to the courtroom slammed open, the sharp bang cutting through the verdict like a cold knife. Every head turned toward the sudden intrusion as gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Two uniformed officers stormed into the room, their faces gripped with urgency. One carried a sealed document which he rushed to Judge Grayson's bench. Grayson snapped her gaze toward the bailiff stationed in the corners of the courtroom, her brow furrowing into a deep line of irritation but also concern. "What is the meaning of this?" she barked in her usual authoritative tone. The silence that had reigned over the proceedings now transformed into a chaotic hum of murmurs and speculation. Grayson unfolded the document, her hawk-like gaze scanning the contents. Whatever was written there caused a visible hardening in her posture. After a tense pause, she addressed the courtroom. "There has been a development that requires immediate attention. I will remind everyone in this courtroom to remain calm and composed." Camille's mind raced as she exchanged a quick glance with Mr. Wallace. The interruption felt coordinated, deliberate, an 11th-hour play to disrupt the momentum of the moment. She clenched her teeth, her instincts telling her this was no coincidence. But before any answers could surface, Grayson turned her icy stare toward the defense table. "Counselor for the defense, I suggest you prepare your client for questioning after this recess. I will not tolerate gamesmanship in this court." The defense attorney's lips parted as though to argue, but he caught the sharp glint in Judge Grayson's eyes. He quickly fell silent, leaning toward Hargrove to whisper furiously. Hargrove, on the other hand, appeared frozen, his face pale, his eyes shifting nervously across the room. The judge called for a 30-minute recess, her gavel bringing an abrupt end to the moment. The gallery erupted in whispers as everyone rose to leave the room, reporters darting outside to deliver breaking news commentary, weaving desperate theories about the interruption. Camille, meanwhile, steadied her breathing. The disruption had shaken the atmosphere but not her resolve. She had faced darker storms than this. Outside in the hallway, Camille caught sight of the rushing officers who had caused the disruption. She stopped one with a calm but firm tone. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of activity around her. "What exactly is going on?" The officer hesitated before lowering his voice. "There's been a new witness who claims to have evidence. I can't say anything more, ma'am." "Can't or won't," Camille replied sharply, her brow arched. But the officer simply shook his head and disappeared into a side room before she could continue. Back inside the courtroom, the atmosphere hung heavier than before when the session resumed. Judge Grayson once again took her seat, her commanding presence demanding immediate order. This court accepts the sealed affidavit along with supplementary materials provided by the officers during the recess, she began. However, it will be reviewed in a closed session to ensure its relevance and legality. For now, we will proceed with the verdict. For a moment, the tension eased as the jury foreperson stepped forward once more. The manila folder remained ominously on Grayson's desk, a silent reminder that the drama was far from over. Still, all attention snapped back to the foreperson as she resumed reading. Find the defendant, Officer Dean Hargrove, guilty of using excessive force and deprivation of Mr. Wallace's civil rights under the color of law. The gallery erupted like a dam breaking, cries of relief mingling with angry shouting. From the plaintiff's table, Camille exhaled a slow, steady breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She allowed herself the barest of smiles as Mr. Wallace buried his face in his hands, overcome with emotion. But the storm wasn't over. Grayson banged her gavel, calling for silence. Order! Her sharp voice clawed over the din, pulling everyone back to the present. This court has not yet concluded. Everyone should remain in their seats until the next steps are determined. At the defense table, Hargrove's expression lost its last vestiges of control. His face twisted, anger and desperation visible in every line etched into his features. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but Hargrove suddenly slammed his hands onto the table, shouting, "This whole thing is a setup. You people wanted to see me fall from the start." Once again, the room descended into chaos, but this time the outburst felt volatile, dangerous. Bailiffs approached quickly, and Judge Grayson did not hesitate. "Remove the defendant from this courtroom immediately. Any further outbursts will result in contempt charges." As Hargrove was dragged out, his voice echoed, laced with venom. "You think this is over, Lewis? You think you've won?" Camille stood motionless, her calm exterior refusing to crack. But inside her mind, she replayed his words, cataloging the precise tone and language he'd used. There was something in "I to promise," a threat that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As the courtroom emptied an hour later, Camille stood in the hallway, surrounded by reporters who launched a flurry of questions. She ignored them, though her gaze was fixed ahead, her thoughts racing as she processed the sudden shift in events. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen. Another text from the same anonymous sender. "The verdict may not be the end. Stay vigilant." This time, Camille didn't hesitate. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and strode out of the courthouse, her mind already piecing together the next move she'd need to make. Recap. The jury finds Officer Hargrove guilty, but an 11th-hour disruption, coupled with his ominous courtroom outburst, sets the stage for unsettling new threats to emerge in the aftermath of the verdict. The courtroom felt like a coiled serpent, its tension coiled tighter with every tick of the clock. Camille Lewis sat at the plaintiff's table, her spine straight, her hands motionless over a stack of meticulously arranged notes. She didn't allow herself so much as a deep breath, knowing every action in the room today could shift the course of justice. In the silence, the faint creak of leather from her chair sounded like a resounding echo. Judge Eleanor Grayson's entrance shattered the oppressive waiting. She swept into the room with her customary poise, her robes billowing as she moved with swift purpose. The gavel struck, cutting sharply through the dull hum of whispers, and the court stood still. Every eye followed as Grayson surveyed the occupants of her courtroom. Her expression was granite, her presence imperial. When she spoke, her voice was a scalpel cutting clean through the room's chaotic thoughts. "Court is now in session." The defense looked pale, rattled from the events of the previous day. Dean Hargrove sat silently at the defendant's table, his once imposing demeanor now reduced to a withdrawn shadow. His eyes were hooded, his broad shoulders slumped forward. Even his lawyer, the carefully polished attorney who had presented a stone wall earlier in the trial, now adjusted his tie nervously, his movements jerky and unnatural. In stark contrast, Camille was a study in calm ferocity. She didn't move much when the judge called the session to order, but her presence filled the room regardless, her aura commanding attention like a quiet storm poised on the verge of eruption. She had no need for theatrics. The weight of her argument had already shifted the scales of doubt. Today, she would ensure that they stayed tilted toward justice. From the opening arguments to the now damning evidence that had unfolded over the last week, Camille's carefully laid strategy had built an undeniable momentum. The jury's rigid attention told her one clear truth. They were ready to listen, and she was ready to deliver. Judge Grayson began by addressing the sealed affidavit that had been placed before her during the previous session. She handled it delicately, her voice a careful mixture of curiosity and sternness as she said, "I've reviewed the contents of this affidavit during recess and concluded that they are admissible, within reason, to further contextualize the events in question, specifically as they pertain to the defendant's alleged conduct and his state of mind before and after the incident." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery, a prickling undercurrent of disbelief and speculation. Judge Grayson allowed the wave of unease just long enough to underscore the courtroom's gravity before her gavel struck once more. "We will proceed. Counselor Lewis, I assume you are prepared to address this matter?" Camille stood elegantly, her movements precise and unhurried, as if the scene were unfolding on her terms. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied smoothly. "The contents of this affidavit reveal new evidence concerning Officer Hargrove's actions in the hours leading up to the traffic stop involving Mr. Wallace. With your permission, I would like to introduce testimony from an individual who can corroborate these findings." The defense was immediately on their feet, their lead attorney nearly toppling his chair as he stood. "Objection! This late submission of evidence is prejudicial and disrupts the integrity of the trial." Judge Grayson's sharp gaze silenced him in an instant. "Counselor, the integrity of this trial lies in ensuring all relevant information is brought to light." Objection overruled. "Ms. Lewis, proceed." Camille nodded her thanks and turned to the bailiffs. The plaintiff calls Mark Reynolds to the stand. A shuffle of movement drew every gaze toward the back of the courtroom. Mark Reynolds was an unassuming man in his early 40s, his bald head gleaming under the courtroom lights. He wore a plain gray suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, and his nervous energy was palpable as he made his way to the witness stand. Despite his apparent unease, there was a resolute determination in the set of his jaw. After being sworn in, Reynolds met Camille's gaze, and she offered him a reassuring nod. As if bolstered by her confidence, his back straightened slightly, and his voice steadied as he answered her initial questions about his identity and ties to the police department where Hargrove had spent his career. "Mr. Reynolds," Camille said, her tone measured and precise, "can you confirm your relationship to Officer Hargrove?" "Yes, ma'am," Reynolds replied. "I worked alongside Officer Hargrove on a number of neighborhood patrols about 2 years back." "And during your time working with him," Camille continued, "did you ever encounter anything that stood out to you about his behavior or his approach to law enforcement?" Reynolds hesitated, his eyes darting toward Hargrove, who was glaring at him with barely concealed fury. But then his expression hardened, resolve overtaking fear. "Yes, there were things that didn't feel right. The way he talked about certain neighborhoods, certain people." "Can you elaborate?" Reynolds shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping briefly to his hands before he forced himself to look back up. "He'd make comments, offhand remarks, calling people troublemakers or saying, they don't belong here, even when we'd just be passing folks walking down the street. And it wasn't everyone he said that about, just certain people." The gallery stirred uneasily, the subtext of Reynolds's words all too clear. Camille allowed the weight of his testimony to settle before pressing further. "And these comments, did they extend beyond casual remarks?" Reynolds opened his mouth, hesitated, then shut it again as though weighing his next words carefully. "There were times," he finally said, "when it felt like he was looking for a reason to react, like he was trying to make a situation worse instead of better. I didn't speak up because, well, back then, I didn't think it could go anywhere. But now, knowing what happened to Mr. Wallace," his voice trailed off, guilt clouding his expression. The defense immediately launched into a blistering cross-examination, their lawyer painting Reynolds as an unreliable and disgruntled former colleague. But Camille had anticipated the attacks and had prepared him well. Each question thrown at him was met with calm, consistent answers that aligned neatly with the narrative Camille had been constructing since day one of the trial. By the time Reynolds stepped down, the jury's expressions had shifted. Some looked visibly troubled. Others appeared deep in contemplation, their gazes darting between Reynolds and Hargrove as they processed the implications. Camille wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests permission to present a series of emails obtained through subpoenaed department records. These communications further demonstrate Officer Hargrove's troubling pattern of behavior." The defense objected vehemently, accusing Camille of conducting a trial by ambush, but Judge Grayson overruled them once more. The emails were entered into evidence, projected on the screen for all to see. They were damning conversations between Hargrove and a small clique of like-minded officers, peppered with racially charged language and flippant remarks about complaints filed by community members. One email in particular drew audible gasps from the gallery. Sent just 2 days before the incident with Mr. Wallace, it read, "Some people just don't get it. They think they can mouth off and walk away. Not on my watch." The defense scrambled to mitigate the damage, their lead attorney arguing that the emails were taken out of context and didn't reflect Hargrove's true intentions. But Camille countered with precision, her calm demeanor cutting through the noise like a blade. "Intentions don't erase outcomes," she said, her voice steady and firm. "What these emails show is a mindset that aligns disturbingly well with the events of that day." The afternoon wore on, each piece of evidence building upon the last until the story they wove was inescapable. By the time Camille delivered her summation, the courtroom was silent, all attention fixed on her. "This case is about more than one traffic stop," she began, her voice low but resonant. "It's about more than one man's actions. It's about a pattern, a system, a culture that allows authority to be weaponized against those it is meant to protect." Officer Hargrove didn't just fail Mr. Wallace on that day. He failed his oath, his community, and the very foundation of justice itself. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. She turned to the jury, her gaze piercing. "You've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimony. Now it's up to you to decide, will we continue to let fear and hatred masquerade as law? Or will we stand up here and now and say, not anymore?" As Camille took her seat, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. The jury was excused to deliberate, and the courtroom was left in a deafening silence as everyone filed out to await the verdict. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with anticipation. Camille stood apart from the throng of reporters, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages she ignored. She breathed deeply, her thoughts focused not on the outcome, but on the larger fight she knew was far from over. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps, Camille's phone vibrated one final time. She glanced at the screen and froze. Another message from the unknown sender. "This isn't over, Camille. Watch your back." Recap. Camille unveils damning emails and a colleague's testimony exposing Hargrove's escalating behavior. As tensions heighten, threats against Camille grow more ominous. The courtroom vibrates with an intensity that seems to ripple through every wooden bench, every stone wall. Camille Lewis stands once again, her figure steady and commanding like a lighthouse piercing through stormy seas. The stakes have reached their peak, and she knows the room holds its collective breath. Today, the scales of justice will not merely tip, they will crash under the weight of truth revealed. Judge Eleanor Grayson enters with the same stern authority, her robes flowing behind her like a shadow as she ascends to her position. The gavel rings out sharply, slicing through the hum of whispers. "Court is now in session," she states, her voice steady, demanding order, and leaving no room for distraction. This day, the penultimate showdown will demand from all present both courage and clarity. Climbing to her feet, Camille adjusts her blazer in a precise motion, each click of her heels echoing as she approaches the heart of the room. The jury, a mix of guarded faces, stares back at her. Some wear the weariness of the marathon they've endured, while others sit upright, their gazes sharp, eager for the truth to crystallize. "Your Honor, today the plaintiff seeks to consolidate the court's understanding of the sequence of events and the systemic patterns difficult to ignore. To this end, I would like to call to the stand an individual who worked closely with Officer Hargrove during his most active deployment periods." The gallery rustles, alive with curiosity, their whispers swelling momentarily before Judge Grayson lifts a sharp eyebrow, immediately restoring order without so much as a word. Camille waits, her serene confidence in contrast with the increasing unease visible on Hargrove's face. He shifts uncomfortably, cracks are starting to spread across his rigid facade. "Your Honor, I call Lieutenant Sarah Whitlock to the stand." Gasps flutter like startled birds through the room. A figure steps into the witness box, a tall, stern-faced woman, her weathered police uniform carrying an air of respect earned rather than assumed. Her face is unreadable, but her movements deliberate, her hands steady as she takes the oath. Camille begins, her voice low but firm, each word meticulously chosen. "Lieutenant Whitlock, you have served in law enforcement for over 2 decades. Can you confirm for the court the number of years you worked alongside Dean Hargrove?" 17 years, Whitlock replies, her voice clear and steady, though her gaze falters just slightly as it lingers on Hargrove before snapping back to Camille. And during those years, Camille continues, her steps carefully measured as she paces before the jury. Can you speak to the number of departmental complaints filed involving Officer Hargrove? Whitlock hesitates, her fingers curling subtly against the wooden railing of the stand. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was significant. Too many to ignore. Camille steps closer, her expression softening just a fraction. Not to relax the witness, but to ensure her authority emanates like a lighthouse guiding their collective focus. Lieutenant Whitlock, to your knowledge, how many of those complaints were fully investigated? Whitlock exhales, the weight of a truth long buried pressing heavy on her words. Officially? None that I know of. The gallery erupts. Indignant murmurs crescendo into a hum of collective outrage until Grayson's gavel rips through the noise, restoring fragile silence. Camille doesn't react to the chaos. Her focus is a surgical blade. Lieutenant Whitlock, she resumes once quiet reigns. Why is it that none of these complaints were pursued? Whitlock pauses, casting a brief glance toward the jury as though measuring the gravity of their gazes. Because there was a culture of protection. If an officer brought in results arrests, case closures, the rest was ignored. And Hargrove, he knew how to play that system better than anyone. The words hang in the air, weighted by a truth too heavy to easily dismiss. Hargrove's attorney leaps to his feet, his voice sharp with desperation. Objection! Speculative and prejudicial. Judge Grayson leans forward from her bench, her expression carved from ice. Overruled. Lieutenant Whitlock's testimony speaks to her professional experience. Counsel may proceed. Camille nods, pivoting effortlessly, her voice growing sharper now, her tempo more aggressive. Lieutenant, could you describe the methods Officer Hargrove would employ to, as you suggest, manipulate outcomes to his favor? Whitlock swallows hard. He would escalate situations unnecessarily, turn a minor infraction into grounds for search or arrest, and it mostly happened in specific neighborhoods, with specific people. The insinuation is clear. The jury, visibly tense, absorbs the careful framing as Whitlock's words echo through the courtroom. Hargrove shifts again, his face stripped of its earlier defiance, replaced by a pale and shadowed unease. Camille steps closer, her voice growing even colder now. Lieutenant Whitlock, on the topic of escalation, are you aware of email communications suggesting that Officer Hargrove actively held prejudiced attitudes towards certain demographics? Whitlock's response is immediate, as if she's anticipated the question. Yes. The gallery stirs, but Camille isn't finished. The screens in the courtroom flash an image and email string, submitted previously but now bolstered by the contextual weight of the lieutenant's testimony. Words in bold black font phrases like, control these people, and more, make them feel it, reverberate through the room like a second hammer strike. The defense tries valiantly to object, their outburst clamoring for inadmissibility, but the threads tying the evidence back to Hargrove's pattern are undeniable. When Judge Grayson allows the emails to remain in the record, Camille delivers her final thrust. Lieutenant Whitlock, Camille says, her voice a velvet glove concealing steel, do you believe Officer Hargrove's documented behavior, matched with his track record, suggests negligence? Whitlock speaks after a breath that feels laden with years of regret. No, she asserts quietly, before raising her voice to land the blow. It suggests intent. Gasps ripple once more, unstoppable even under the judge's gavel. Behind the defense table, Hargrove's face drains of all expression, his posture crumbling into defensive rigidity. His attorney scribbles furiously on a notepad, his whispers urgent, but Camille watches them only for a split second, more calculating than reactive. As proceedings reach the midday break, the storm lingers within the courthouse even as its players step into the lobby. Reporters close in like vultures to prey, firing questions laden with speculation. Camille ignores them, her focus a honed blade, but the faint vibration of her phone draws her attention to a single glowing message. Be prepared for retaliation. Desperation makes people dangerous. The sender remains unknown, but the warning feels as imminent as a distant thunderstorm, tugging at the edge of reason, even as Camille tucks her phone away. The afternoon session resumes with a noticeable tension, the kind that turns every passing word into a potential powder keg. Camille plays her strategy with masterful restraint, her every motion deliberate as she readdresses prior evidence in the case dashcam footage, the forensic linguist's analysis, and testimony pieced from multiple corroborating witnesses. Each item rebuilds the narrative vigorously and steadily, hammering home the undeniable pattern. The defense attempts a last-ditch Hail Mary strategy, calling an expert in high-stress policing psychology to argue that Hargrove's actions stemmed from reflexive decision-making under pressure, a narrative designed to feign complication where clarity reigns. They attempt to muddy waters Camille has already clarified, but her cross-examination dismantles them piece by piece, her questions carefully structured to corner the narrative into irrelevance. When the day edges closer to its conclusion, the tension is nearly unbearable. The jurors shift faintly in their seats, their minds visibly strained with the weight of judgment as Camille prepares her closing questions for the witness already crumbling under her cross-examination. Closing almost with a whisper, Camille's voice slices across strings grown taut with tangible unease. "Officer Hargrove," she says at last, her gaze lifting unflinching toward the defendant himself, "has often sought to reduce accountability under two veils: the vacuum of situational uncertainty and the culture of unchecked authority. Here in this courtroom, do you believe either avenue still holds you hidden?" Behind the table, Hargrove's lips curl faintly, a sneer attempting to push through the growing cracks as if defiance is the only weapon left to him. Not even Judge Grayson's gavel can silence what this moment leaves hanging unsaid. Cliffhanger. Outside the courthouse, as dusk falls, Camille's phone vibrates again. Another message, this one short, chilling, and devoid of subtlety. Not all storms end in calm. The courtroom is submerged in an eerie quiet, the kind of silence that almost feels alive. Everything hangs in the balance as Camille Lewis takes her place at the plaintiff's table for what promises to be the final, decisive chapter in this grueling trial. Judge Eleanor Grayson wastes no time. The gavel falls with a single, crisp crack. Court is now in session, rings through the air like a thunderclap. Camille stands, her navy suit sharp and her gaze colder than steel. Today, she is all precision, her every gesture calculated, every word crafted with intent. Her profile as a methodical lawyer who has been building an unassailable case over the last 2 days now reaches its crescendo. Her opponent at the defense table, Officer Dean Hargrove, man once brimming with defiant confidence, sits slumped, his shoulders caved inward. His lawyer, pale, clammy, and visibly rattled, whispers furiously in his ear, trying to reinflate what's left of their deflated defense. The jury enters, their faces masks of contemplation, all traces of distraction burned away by the weight of what they've heard. Their collective attention points unflinchingly toward the center of the room, where Camille holds the final pieces of this long-brewing puzzle. Every angle of her strategy has been sharp, and today will be no different. "Your Honor," Camille begins, stepping forward with a calm, commanding tone, "before we proceed to closing arguments, I'd like permission to recall Officer Dean Hargrove for cross-examination." The defense explodes to life, their attorney rising so quickly his chair screeches ear-splittingly across the floor. "Objection! Your Honor, we were given no notice of this," and Judge Grayson's raised hand cuts his objections like a scythe through overgrown weeds. "Ms. Lewis, this is highly unusual. Explain quickly." Camille nods. "Over the weekend, we received corroborative evidence that is pivotal to this case. I believe it will clarify critical aspects of Officer Hargrove's conduct and necessity for this jury to fully weigh their verdict. I am prepared to submit this evidence now for review." The tension tightens as Judge Grayson scrutinizes Camille for a moment before nodding once. "Proceed." Quickly, behind her polished desk, Camille withdraws a slim, sealed file and motions for the bailiff to deliver it to the judge. The gallery, which has grown tight-lipped from collective anxiety, watches every movement as if the reveal of this evidence will change their understanding of existence itself. Judge Grayson peers down at the file briefly before handing it back. "Very well, Ms. Lewis. Make your case." Hargrove is called to the stand, much to his visible discomfort. The officer, for all his bluster throughout these proceedings, looks like a man who continues to sink in quicksand. His face is gaunt, and his glaring eyes shoot daggers at Camille, but she is far beyond intimidation now. She approaches him with a measured step, her hands lightly clasped together. "Officer Hargrove," she begins, her voice calm and dangerously accommodating, "I want to give you the opportunity to address something. On the date of the incident with Mr. Wallace, why did you choose to initiate that traffic stop?" "We've gone over this, haven't we?" Hargrove snaps, trying to steady himself. He was acting suspicious. kept checking his mirror. For a moment, Camille says nothing. Her silent, piercing gaze eats away at Hargrove's patience until he fidgets under the weight of it. Then she leans forward slightly. Would you care to explain why, on the morning of that traffic stop, you sent the following text message to one of your colleagues? At that exact moment, an image appears on the screen to Hargrove's right, pulled directly from the newly admitted files. It's a blurred screenshot, zoomed in for readability. The text reads clearly, "Jumping on patrol. Time to scare some sense into these idiots." The gallery gasps as the revelation lands squarely on Hargrove's shoulders. The room hums with murmurs as even Judge Grayson's gaze sharpens with curiosity and restrained disapproval. "Explain that to the jury, Officer Hargrove," Camille says quietly, each word landing like a gauntlet. Hargrove stammers, his mouth opening and closing as though he's reached the end of his script and can't improvise. It was a joke," he spits. "Do you people have no sense of humor?" It was nothing. His last words ignite something in the room. The spectators stir. A few whisper angrily. One person audibly scoffs before being silenced by a bailiff. Camille tilts her head, her expression unreadable but tightly laced with purpose. "Nothing," she repeats softly. "Let's pair that with something else. Your Honor, let's reference exhibit radio transmission logs from Officer Hargrove's unit on the day of the incident." The defense objects loudly but is quickly overruled, as Camille has already established earlier precedent for linking these records to Hargrove's operational behavior. The logs, now displayed in clean transcription on the courtroom monitor, detail calls between Hargrove and dispatch. The jury's attention zeroes in on an excerpt highlighted in red. "Dispatch, Unit 23, confirm reason for initiating stop? Hargrove, just got a feeling, you know how it is." The phrase "just got a feeling" leaves no room for misinterpretation, even as the defense furiously shuffles paper in a desperate bid to undermine its impact. The gallery stirs once again under the enormity of the impression left by Camille's evidence. Hargrove squirming under cross-examination only amplifies the sound of silence that remains each time Camille pauses, allowing every word to fester richly in collective hearing. "Is that standard policy, Officer Hargrove?" Camille asks, her voice laced with faux innocence. Relying